The torch was already in his hand when Nathan screamed her name across the burning yard. "Evelyn, get down!" Charles Whitmore turned flame, lighting his face like a man who had already decided he had nothing left to lose. 15 years alone had taught Nathan Caldwell how to survive without anyone. It had never taught him how to watch the woman he loved stand in the path of a man burning down everything they'd built together. She had knocked on his door by mistake. She was about to become the reason his whole world either survived the night or turned to ash before his eyes. If you're new here, subscribe and stay with me until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from tonight. The woman who arrived at the wrong door. Nathan Caldwell had built his entire life around silence. For 15 years, he had trained himself not to want anything more than what silence could give him. And on that particular October evening, standing in his own doorway, staring at a stranger dripping rainwater onto his floor, silence was the only thing he knew how to reach for. "I don't know who you are," he said slowly, "but you have the wrong ranch." "This is the Caldwell property," the woman said. "Nathan Caldwell, that's you." "It is." "Then I'm not in the wrong place." She pulled a folded water-stained letter from inside her coat and held it toward him like evidence in a courtroom. "You wrote to the agency in Helena. You said you were a rancher 38 years old in need of a wife to help manage your household. You said you were a decent, God-fearing man who could offer stability. Does any of that sound familiar to you?" Nathan didn't move to take the letter. He didn't need to. Every word of it was foreign to him, and yet something cold moved through his chest anyway because someone somewhere had written those words and signed his name to them. "I never wrote that letter," he said. The woman's composure cracked for the first time. It wasn't tears. It was something harder, something closer to disbelief curdling into anger. "The driver who brought me out here left 20 minutes ago. He's not coming back tonight. The next stage through this valley isn't for 4 days. So if you're telling me I crossed 400 miles for a lie, you'd better start explaining who told it. Because right now, the only proof I have that I'm not a fool is standing in your doorway." "I believe you," Nathan said quietly. "I just don't believe I'm the one who lied to you." She stared at him, rain still running off the brim of her bonnet, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. The wind picked up behind her, rattling the porch post, and somewhere out past the barn, a horse called out into the dark. "My name is Evelyn Harper," she finally said, like she needed to hear herself say something true. "I was told I would be married by sundown tomorrow. I gave up the only work I had. I sold what little I owned to pay for this trip, and I am not going to stand outside in a Montana storm while you decide whether or not you feel like being honest with me." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, then stepped back from the door. "Come inside before you catch your death. We'll sort out the truth once you're not freezing." She hesitated only a second before stepping past him into the house, and the moment she crossed the threshold, something shifted in the air between them, quiet and unspoken, the first small movement in a story that neither of them had chosen, and neither of them could yet see the shape of. Inside the house was plain and orderly, in the way a man's house becomes when there is no one left to please but himself. Evelyn stood near the firewater dripping from the hem of her coat and watched Nathan with the wary attention of someone deciding how much danger she was in. "You live here alone," she said. It wasn't a question. "I do. No family." "Not anymore, Samar." Something in the way he said it told her not to ask further, and for a woman who had spent the last several days imagining the man she was meant to marry, the reality of him, tall-guarded, careful with his words, was not what she expected. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I didn't come here for adventure. I didn't come here because I dreamed of marrying a stranger. I came because the life I had didn't want me anymore, and this was the only offer I had left." "What happened to the life you had?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "That's not something I discussed with a man I met 10 minutes ago." "Fair enough." Nathan moved to the stove and set a pot of water to warm more out of habit than hospitality. "But you should know whoever wrote that letter knew things about me. My age, my land, the fact that I live alone. That's not the kind of information a stranger picks at random. So someone who knows you sent for a bride in your name. Looks that way. Any idea who?" Nathan's hand stilled over the stove. There was exactly one name that came to mind, and he didn't like where that name led. "Not yet," he said, which was mostly true. "But I intend to find out." Evelyn studied him, arms crossed, rainwater still pooling faintly at her boots. "And what happens to me while you find out?" It was the question neither of them had an answer to yet, and it hung in the room like smoke that hadn't decided which direction to drift. "There's a spare room," Nathan said finally. "You can stay the night. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you back to Helena or wherever you'd rather go." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Evelyn said, and for the first time, her voice lost its edge and became something quieter, something closer to exhaustion. "That letter was the only plan I had left." Nathan didn't answer right away. He had spent 15 years making sure no one's problems became his own, and now a stranger stood in his kitchen with nowhere else in the world to be, and something in him, some old instinct he thought he buried, refused to turn her back out into the storm. "Then you'll stay until we know more," he said. "That's all I can promise tonight." Evelyn nodded slowly, like she was accepting terms she hadn't wanted to accept, and the two of them stood in careful, uneasy silence while the storm outside beat against the windows, both of them wondering exactly what kind of trap they had wandered into, and neither of them yet imagining how deep it went. The next morning, Nathan rode into town before sunrise, leaving Evelyn with a short list of instructions and an even shorter explanation. He needed answers, and there was only one place in the territory he trusted to give them honestly. Sheriff Boone Whitfield had known Nathan since before either of them had gray in their beard, and when Nathan explained what had happened, the sheriff's expression shifted from amusement to something far more serious. "A woman showed up at your door saying she's your mail-order bride. That's the short version. And you're telling me you didn't write for one?" "I'm telling you I haven't written a personal letter in years, Boone. You know that better than most." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, chewing on the inside of his cheek the way he always did when a problem refused to be simple. "Somebody went through a lot of trouble to make this look real. Marriage agencies don't just accept letters from nowhere. Whoever did this knew your situation well enough to be convincing. That's what worries me. You got enemies, Nathan." Nathan thought of Charles Whitmore, the land buyer who had been circling his property for the better part of a year, with offers that grew more insistent each time Nathan refused them. He thought of the surveyors who had shown up twice on his land without permission, the questions townsfolk had started asking about water rights near his eastern boundary, the sudden interest in a ranch that had been unremarkable for a decade. "Maybe," Nathan said, "I need you to find out who filed that request with the agency. Whoever it was, they used my name and they know things about my life that a stranger has no business knowing. I'll send a wire to Helena today." Boone studied him for a moment. "And the woman, what are you going to do with her?" "I don't know yet." "You can't just keep a strange woman in your house, Nathan. People talk." "People are already going to talk," Nathan said. "Might as well give them something worth talking about." By the time Nathan returned to the ranch that afternoon, he found Evelyn in the yard, sleeves rolled up, mending a section of fence that had been sagging for months. She didn't hear him approach until his boots crunched the gravel behind her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I didn't have anything else to do," she answered without looking up. "And I've never been good at sitting still while I wait for my life to be decided by someone else." Nathan watched her work for a moment, the efficient, practiced way she handled the wire and post, and something about it surprised him. "You've done ranch work before." "My father raised cattle before he lost the land to debt. I grew up doing this kind of work, whether anyone thought a girl should or not." "What happened to your father?" Evelyn's hands paused briefly before continuing. "He died. Debts didn't. My stepmother made it very clear I wasn't welcome to stay once he was gone." She finished tying off the wire and finally looked at him. "That's the story you wanted, isn't it? Why a woman would risk everything on a stranger's letter." "I wasn't asking to pry." "Everyone asked to pry. At least you're honest about wanting to know." She stood brushing dirt from her skirt. "Did you find anything in town?" "The sheriff's looking into who filed the request with the agency. Whoever it was knew enough about my life to make it convincing." "You think someone did this on purpose? To hurt you?" "I think someone did this on purpose," Nathan said, "and I don't think it has anything to do with hurting me specifically. I think it has to do with my land." Evelyn frowned. "Your land?" "There's a man named Charles Whitmore. He's been trying to buy me out for the better part of a year. I've refused every offer. Lately, those offers have started sounding less like offers and more like warnings." "And you think sending me here was some kind of scheme?" "I think whoever did this wanted to create a mess, a scandal. Something that would make my life difficult enough that selling would start looking easier than fighting." Evelyn absorbed that for a long moment, and Nathan watched something harden behind her eyes, the same instinct for self-preservation he recognized because he carried it himself. "So I'm not just an accident," she said quietly. "I'm a weapon someone pointed at you without asking me." "It looks that way. That should make me furious." "Does it?" "No," she said, surprising them both. "It makes me want to know exactly who thought they could use me like a piece on a chessboard so I can be the reason their plan falls apart instead." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something unfamiliar moving through his chest, respect maybe, or the beginning of it. "You're not what I expected when I opened that door last night." "Neither are you," Evelyn said. "I expected a man cold enough to write for a wife through the mail. Instead, I found a man who didn't write anything at all and still gave a stranger a roof instead of the road." Neither of them had an answer for what that meant yet, and the silence between them stretched, filled with something neither one dared to name. That evening, Nathan sat across from Evelyn at his kitchen table, a rare shared meal between two people who had known each other less than a full day, and yet were already tangled in the same unraveling mystery. "I need to know more about the woman you lost," Evelyn said carefully. 15 years is a long time to carry something and never let another person near it. Nathan's fork stilled against his plate. "How do you know about that? You said it yourself last night." "Not anymore when I asked about family. A man doesn't say those two words with that much weight unless there's a story behind them." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with a door he hadn't opened in a very long time. "Her name was Sarah," he finally said. "We were going to be married, spring of 1811. She died of fever 3 weeks before the wedding." "I'm sorry." Everyone was sorry. Sorry doesn't bring a person back. Nathan looked down at his plate, his voice steady but distant, the practiced calm of a man who had said these words to himself 1,000 times in the dark. "After that, I told myself the ranch was enough. Work was enough. I didn't need anything else, and for a long time I believed it. And now a stranger's shown up at your door and turned your life into a mess again." Something like that. Evelyn considered him for a long moment. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're the villain in whatever story someone's trying to write about you. I think you're a man who's been alone so long he forgot what it felt like to have someone ask him a real question." Nathan looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something in his expression softened just slightly, just enough to notice. "You ask a lot of real questions for someone who's known me one day." "I don't have the patience for small ones," Evelyn said. "Not anymore. Life's too short to waste it circling around what actually matters." They sat with that for a moment, the fire crackling low in the hearth, the wind outside finally beginning to settle after the previous night's storm. "Tomorrow," Nathan said, "I want to ride out and check the eastern boundary. Whitmore's surveyors were seen out there twice last month without permission. If there's something happening on my land I don't know about, I want to see it myself." "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Evelyn said. "But if someone used my arrival to hurt you, I'd like to help fix whatever they broke. Call it settling a debt I didn't ask to owe." Nathan studied her for a long moment, weighing the offer, weighing the strange sudden alliance forming between two people who 24 hours earlier had been complete strangers to one another. "All right," he finally said. "We ride at first light." Neither of them could have known that the eastern boundary would reveal something far more dangerous than a few unauthorized surveyors, or that the truth waiting for them out past the tree line would tie Evelyn's arrival to Charles Whitmore's ambitions in a way neither of them yet understood. The ride out the next morning was quiet, both of them watching the tree line more carefully than either wanted to admit. When they reached the eastern boundary, Nathan pulled his haunt up short at staring at freshly cut stakes driven into the ground in a straight, deliberate line markers that had no business being there. "These weren't here last month," he said. Evelyn dismounted and crouched beside one of the stakes, running her fingers over a small metal tag attached near the top. "Whitmore Land Development," she read aloud. "They're not just surveying, Nathan. They're marking boundaries like they already own this." Nathan's jaw tightened, a slow, controlled anger settling into his shoulders. "They're planning to file a claim." "Can they do that? This is your land." "Not if they can prove I don't have clear title to all of it," Nathan said grimly. "There was a dispute decades ago before my father bought this section about where the original boundary lines fell. It was settled in court, but if Whitmore's found some old paperwork, some technicality, then a scandal involving a mail-order bride who says you wrote for her under false pretenses would be exactly the kind of thing that makes a judge unwilling to side with you. Evelyn finished quietly. It's not just about the land, Nathan. It's about making you look unstable, untrustworthy, a man who lies to women and can't manage his own affairs. Nathan looked at her, something cold moving through his chest as the full shape of the plan finally came into focus. They didn't send you here by accident, he said slowly. They sent you here to be a witness against me. If this ever reached a courtroom, you'd be the woman who could testify that Nathan Caldwell lied, manipulated, and deceived to get what he wanted. Evelyn's face went pale as the weight of it settled over her. I would have been the proof of exactly the kind of man they wanted people to believe you are. And if you'd played along, Nathan said, willingly or not, it would have worked. The two of them stood in silence amid the freshly driven stakes, the full scope of the scheme finally visible. And for the first time since she had arrived, Evelyn understood that she was not merely a bystander caught in someone else's plan. She was meant to be the weapon itself, loaded and aimed without her consent. And the only reason the plan hadn't already succeeded was that Nathan had opened his door with honesty instead of the lie Whitmore had been counting on. They're going to try again, Evelyn said quietly. Whatever this was supposed to accomplish, it didn't work. Whitmore's not going to just walk away. No, Nathan agreed, his eyes scanning the tree line as though the man himself might step out from behind it. He's not. They rode back toward the house in silence, both of them turning the same question over in their minds without saying it aloud. If Whitmore was willing to fabricate an entire marriage proposal to manipulate Nathan's life, there was no telling what else he was willing to do, and whatever came next, they both understood, without either of them saying it, that they were no longer facing this alone. That night, long after the lanterns had been extinguished and the house had gone quiet, Evelyn lay awake in the small spare room listening to the wind move through the eaves. She thought of the letter that had brought her here, the careful, deliberate lies constructed to convince her Nathan Caldwell was a man in search of a wife. And she thought of the man she had actually found guarded and quiet but honest in a way that unsettled her far more than deception ever could have. Down the hall, Nathan sat at his kitchen table long after Evelyn had gone to bed, staring at the flame of a single candle, turning the same thought over and over until it wore smooth. Someone had studied his life closely enough to know his age, his isolation, his land's value, and had used all of it to build a trap meant to destroy everything he had spent 15 years protecting. He hadn't asked for a bride. He hadn't asked for a stranger to walk into his life and unsettle everything he had carefully kept still for over a decade. But sitting there in the quiet, listening to the house creak around him, the way it always did, he realized for the first time in a very long while that the silence didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like waiting. And somewhere out past the eastern boundary, past the freshly driven stakes marking a claim that didn't belong to him, Charles Whitmore was already planning his next move, one that would force Nathan Caldwell to choose between the land he had spent his whole life protecting and the woman a stranger's lie had accidentally delivered to his door. Orchestrated substantial narrative with escalating tension dialogue, driven storytelling. Orchestrated substantial narrative with escalating tension dialogue, driven storytelling. Morning came sharp and cold, and Nathan was already saddling the horses when Evelyn stepped onto the porch, pulling her coat tight against the wind. Neither of them had slept well. The stakes at the eastern boundary sat between them like an unspoken threat neither one had finished processing. You look like you didn't sleep, Nathan said. I kept thinking about what you said, that I was supposed to be a witness against you. Evelyn walked down the steps toward him. If that's true, then whoever's behind this isn't finished. They wouldn't build a plan this careful and abandon it after one failed attempt. No, Nathan agreed, they wouldn't. So what do we do? Nathan tightened the last strap on his saddle and looked at her, something calculating behind his eyes that hadn't been there the day before. We go see Whitmore ourselves, Evelyn blinked. You want to confront him directly? I want to watch his face when he realizes his plan didn't work, Nathan said. A man who's used to winning doesn't hide his surprise well when he loses. I want to see what he gives away. And if he doesn't give anything away, then at least he knows I'm not going to sit quietly on my own land while he tries to steal it out from under me. They rode into town together and heads turned the moment they passed through the main street. Nathan felt the weight of every stare, every whisper behind gloved hands, and he understood immediately that whatever rumor Whitmore intended to plant had already taken root faster than either of them expected. They're staring, Evelyn murmured. Let them stare. Nathan, they think, I know what they think. His voice was flat, controlled, but Evelyn could hear the tension underneath it. A stranger showed up claiming to be my bride. Now she's riding through town beside me instead of on a stage back to Helena. Of course they're staring. They reached the Whitmore Land Development Office at the edge of town, a building far too polished for a town this small, all fresh paint and glass windows that hadn't existed a year ago. Charles Whitmore himself stepped out before they even reached the door, dressed in a tailored coat that made every rancher in the territory look like he was wearing rags by comparison. Nathan Caldwell, Whitmore said, his smile wide and utterly without warmth. And this must be the young woman everyone's been talking about. Cut the pleasantries, Charles, Nathan said. You know exactly who she is. Whitmore's smile didn't falter, but something flickered behind his eyes, quick and calculating. I'm afraid I don't follow. Someone filed a false marriage request with an agency in Helena using my name, Nathan said. Someone who knew my age, my land, my situation well enough to make it convincing. And a few days later, surveyors wearing your company's tags were driving stakes into my eastern boundary. You'll forgive me if I don't believe those two things happened by coincidence. For the briefest moment, Whitmore's composure cracked just enough for Evelyn to catch it, a flash of surprise, quickly buried beneath practiced calm. That's a serious accusation, Nathan. It's a serious situation. I run a legitimate business, Whitmore said smoothly. I have no knowledge of any marriage agency, and my surveyors go where the county authorizes them to go. Funny, Nathan said, since the county has no record of authorizing any survey on my land. Whitmore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'll look into any confusion regarding the survey lines. As for the rest, I think you're chasing shadows, Nathan. Maybe the isolation out on that ranch has finally caught up with you. Or maybe you underestimated how much I'd notice when someone tried to burn my life down to get what they wanted. The two men stared at each other, the air between them thick, with things neither would say outright. And Evelyn watched Whitmore's eyes flick toward her, assessing, calculating the way a man looks at a piece on a board he thought he had already played. Miss Harper, Whitmore said, his voice suddenly gentler, almost concerned. It must have been quite a shock, discovering the man you traveled so far to marry never sent for you at all. If you find yourself in need of alternative arrangements, my office would be happy to assist. Helena isn't the only place a woman in your position might find better prospects. I don't need your help, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the anger building beneath it. And I know exactly what you tried to do to me. Whitmore tilted his head. I'm afraid I don't understand. You tried to make me a weapon, Evelyn said. You thought if you sent me here with a lie convincing enough, I'd either leave humiliated and spread stories that would ruin Nathan's reputation, or I'd stay and become proof in a courtroom that he manipulates women to get what he wants. Either way, you thought you'd win. Whitmore's expression finally slipped just for a heartbeat, cold fury flashing behind his eyes before the pleasant mask slid back into place. That's an extraordinary theory for a woman who arrived here with nothing but a letter in a bag. It's not a theory, Evelyn said. It's exactly what happened. And now you know I'm not going to play the part you wrote for me. The silence that followed stretched taut as a wire pulled too tight, and for a moment Nathan thought Whitmore might drop the act entirely. Instead, the land buyer smiled again, thin and sharp. You've made a mistake, the both of you, Whitmore said quietly. This land is going to belong to my company eventually, one way or another. The only question is how much you lose before that happens. That sounds like a threat, Nathan said. It's a prediction, Whitmore replied. Good day, Nathan. Miss Harper. He turned and walked back into his office, and Nathan and Evelyn stood on the street in silence, the confrontation leaving neither of them any closer to proof, only closer to certainty. He as good as admitted it, Evelyn said once they were riding back toward the ranch. He admitted nothing, Nathan said grimly. Everything he said could be dealt in a courtroom. That's exactly why men like him are dangerous. They never leave fingerprints. Then how do we stop him? We find proof, Nathan said, real proof. Something that ties him directly to the agency letter or to the survey markers, something a judge can't argue away. And where do we start looking? Nathan considered this for a long moment. The agency in Helena. If someone filed that request in my name, they had to pay for it, and they had to sign something even if it was a false name. There will be a record. Helena's 4 days away. Then we'd better not waste any more time standing here. They rode the rest of the way back to the ranch in silence, both turning over the same unsettling truth. Whitmore hadn't panicked. He hadn't scrambled to protect himself. He had looked at both of them like they were still exactly where he wanted them, and that confidence, more than anything he'd said, told Nathan they were dealing with a man who believed he had already won. That evening, Sheriff Boone Whitfield rode out to the ranch himself, his expression grim before he had even dismounted. "I got the wire back from Helena," he said without preamble. "And," Nathan asked, "the request was filed under your name, paid in full with a deposit that came from a bank account in Bozeman." Boone pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it to Nathan. "Account belongs to a shell company. Took some digging, but the bank clerk who processed it remembered the man who opened it. Tall, well-dressed city manners. Matches Whitmore close enough that I'd stake my badge on it." "Would a judge believe that a judge would want more than a bank clerk's memory?" Boone admitted. "But it's a start. If we can find something that ties Whitmore directly to that account, something with his signature, or a witness willing to testify he set it up himself, that's enough to bring real charges." Evelyn stepped forward. "I could go to Helena, talk to the clerk myself. Sometimes people remember things differently when a woman's the one asking, and if I explain what actually happened to me, that I was the one deceived, he might be willing to say more than he told you in a telegram." "That's a 4-day ride alone," Nathan said. "Then I won't go alone." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "You said yourself you need proof. I'm the one Whitmore tried to use as a weapon. I have every right to be the one who helps take that weapon out of his hands." Nathan studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, respect deepening into something he wasn't ready to name yet. "All right," he said, "we leave at first light." Boone glanced between them, something knowing in his expression that he wisely chose not to comment on. "I'll keep an eye on things here while you're gone, and Nathan, watch your back on that road. If Whitmore's desperate enough to fabricate a marriage, he's desperate enough to make sure you never reach Helena at all." The words settled heavily over the three of them, and Nathan felt the truth of it in his bones. Whitmore hadn't shown his hand fully yet, but he would. The next 4 days on the road tested both of them in ways neither expected. The first night, camped beside a low fire with the horses tethered nearby, Evelyn broke the long silence between them. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When I showed up at your door that first night, why didn't you just turn me away? You had every reason to. I was a stranger accusing you of something you hadn't done." Nathan considered their question longer than she expected. "Because turning you away into a storm wouldn't have proven anything except that I was as cold as everyone already believed I was," he finally said. "And because some part of me recognized what it felt like to have nowhere else to go. After Sarah." "After Sarah," he confirmed quietly. "I spent the first year after she died waiting for someone to tell me it would be all right, and nobody could because it wasn't. I didn't want to be the reason someone else felt that alone." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, the fire crackling between them. "I think that's the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a long time, and I didn't even realize it was kindness until just now." "It wasn't just kindness," Nathan admitted, surprising himself with the honesty of it. "I've been alone a long time, Evelyn. Longer than I probably needed, Diane. Maybe some part of me was tired of the silence, even if I wasn't ready to admit it." Something passed between them in that moment, quiet and fragile. The first honest acknowledgement of the pull neither of them had spoken aloud, and neither one moved to break it. Both of them simply sitting with the weight of it until sleep finally pulled them under. They reached Helena on the 4th day, dust-covered and saddle-sore, and made their way directly to the marriage agency's small brick office near the center of town. The clerk who greeted them, a nervous young man named Mr. Pruitt, went pale the moment Evelyn introduced herself. "You're the woman from the Caldwell request," he said. "I am, and this is Nathan Caldwell, the real one." Pruitt's hands began to shake slightly as he glanced between them. "I told the sheriff everything I remembered on the wire." "We need more than what you told the sheriff," Nathan said, keeping his voice level despite the urgency clawing at him. "We need you to look at something." Evelyn produced the folded letter that had brought her to Nathan's ranch and set it on the counter between them. "This letter, do you remember who submitted it?" Pruitt stared at the letter for a long moment, his throat working. "I remember the man," he finally admitted. "Well-dressed, confident, said he was acting on behalf of a friend who was too shy to write for himself. Paid extra to make sure the arrangement moved quickly. Would you recognize him again?" "I would." "Would you testify to that in front of a judge?" Nathan pressed. Pruitt hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door as though the answer itself might summon trouble. That man made it very clear in a roundabout way that discretion would be rewarded and indiscretion would be regretted. I have a family, Mr. Caldwell. I can't afford to make enemies of men with that kind of money. He's not the only one with money, Nathan said, and he's not the only one who can make life difficult for people who cross him. But right now, you're the only person who can prove that woman standing beside you was deceived and that I was falsely accused of something I never did. If you don't help us, Whitmore wins, and men like him don't stop once they win. They just find the next person to use. Pruitt looked between them for a long, agonized moment, and finally something in his expression shifted guilt, winning out over fear. I have a ledger, he said quietly. Every transaction includes a signature, even for requests submitted on someone else's behalf. If I show you the name he used, will that help? It would help enormously. Pruitt disappeared into the back room and returned moments later with a heavy ledger book, flipping through pages until he found the entry in question. He turned the book around and Nathan and Evelyn both leaned forward to read the signature scrawled at the bottom of the transaction record. Charles W. Mithorn, Evelyn read aloud slowly. That's not his name. It's close enough to be careless. Nathan said something grim settling into his expression. Whitmore, Mithorn. He barely bothered to disguise it. He never thought anyone would trace this far. Would this hold up as evidence? Evelyn asked. Combined with the bank account in Bozeman and Pruitt's willingness to testify to the physical description, Nathan said it's more than enough to force a judge to take this seriously. Pruitt looked between them nervously. If I testify, I need protection. Whitmore's a powerful man in this territory. If word gets out, I helped bring him down. You'll have it, Nathan said firmly. I give you my word. For the first time since they'd walked through the door, Pruitt looked something like relieved. Then take the ledger page, copy it exactly, and I'll sign a statement confirming its accuracy. It's time someone stopped that man from using this office to hurt innocent people. They left Helena the following morning with the copied ledger page Pruitt's signed statement in a fragile but growing sense that the tide might finally be turning in their favor. But as they rode back toward Montana's high country, Evelyn couldn't shake the unease building steadily in her chest. Something doesn't feel right, she said as they made camp that night. What do you mean? Whitmore knew we might come looking for proof. A man that careful, that calculating, wouldn't leave loose threads like Pruitt sitting out in the open unless he either didn't think we'd find them or unless he wanted us to find them. Nathan considered this unease creeping into his own chest. You think this was too easy? I think a man capable of forging an entire marriage proposal wouldn't make a mistake as sloppy as signing his real initials to a ledger, Evelyn said slowly, unless he wanted us distracted while he did something else. The realization hit them both at nearly the same moment, cold and immediate. The ranch, Nathan said, already moving toward his horse. While we've been gone 4 days chasing proof in Helena, he's had 4 days alone to do whatever he actually wanted to do. Evelyn finished already swinging up into her own saddle. They rode through the night, pushing the horses harder than either of them wanted to fear building with every mile closer to home. When they finally crested the last ridge before the ranch came into view, the sight that greeted them stole the breath from both their lungs. Smoke curled up from the direction of the barn, thin and gray against the pale dawn sky. And even from this distance, Nathan could see figures moving near the property line, men who had no business being on his land. No, Nathan breathed, kicking his horse into a full gallop. They reached the ranch to find the north pasture fence torn down, cattle scattered across open ground, and the barn's corner smoldering from what had clearly been a deliberate fire extinguished before it could spread but close enough to send a clear message. Boone Whitfield stood near the wreckage, his expression grim, a bandage wrapped around one forearm. What happened? Nathan demanded, swinging down from his horse before it had fully stopped. 3 men rode in yesterday afternoon, Boone said. Said they were checking survey lines. When I told them to leave, things got ugly fast. They tore down the fence, scattered your herd, and set fire to the barn corner before I managed to run them off. He gestured toward his bandaged arm. Got a little too close to convincing one of them to leave faster than he wanted to. Did you get names, descriptions? Didn't need names, Boone said grimly. One of them wasn't shy about who sent him. Said Mr. Whitmore wanted you to understand that Helena wouldn't change anything and that you had until the end of the month to reconsider his offer, Or next time, it wouldn't just be a fence that burned. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. He knew exactly when we'd be gone. He probably counted on it. Nathan said, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. He wanted us chasing proof in Helena, so we wouldn't be here to stop this. Then the ledger, the statement, all of it, is still real evidence, Nathan said. But it's clear now that Whitmore isn't just trying to buy this land anymore. He's trying to make staying here so dangerous that selling starts looking like survival instead of surrender. Boone studied the two of them for a long moment. Nathan, I've known you a long time. I've never seen you fight for anything the way you're fighting for this ranch, or for that matter, for her. His eyes flicked briefly toward Evelyn. Whitmore's counting on you being alone in this. Maybe it's time the whole valley understood exactly what kind of man is trying to steal from one of their own. That night, after Boone had ridden back to town and the last of the smoke had cleared from the air, Nathan and Evelyn stood together near the damaged fence line, surveying the wreckage of the last 4 days in silence. I should apologize, Evelyn finally said. For what? If I hadn't come here, none of this would be happening to you. Whitmore wouldn't have used a fake marriage to set his plan in motion. Your ranch wouldn't be under attack. You didn't do this, Evelyn, Nathan said firmly. Whitmore did this. He would have found another way to come after me, eventually, a letter or no letter. The only difference is that this time I'm not facing it completely alone. Evelyn looked up at him, something vulnerable moving behind her eyes. You don't have to say that just to make me feel better. I'm not in the habit of saying things I don't mean, Nathan said quietly. You rode 4 days each direction, faced down a man trying to destroy both our lives, and got a frightened clerk to risk his safety for the truth. Whatever else this is, Evelyn, you are not the reason my life fell apart. You might be the reason it doesn't. The words hung between them, heavier than either had intended, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, both feeling the shift in the air, something neither was ready to name but both were beginning to feel regardless. We should get some sleep, Evelyn finally said, though she made no move to leave. Tomorrow we need to decide what to do with what we found. Tomorrow, Nathan agreed, though his voice carried a reluctance that matched her own. Neither of them moved for a long moment, standing together in the ruined pasture beneath a sky just beginning to lighten toward dawn, and for the first time since Evelyn had knocked on his door 6 days earlier, Nathan allowed himself to consider a possibility he hadn't dared consider in 15 years, that the woman standing beside him wasn't merely a complication in his fight against Whitmore, but the first person in over a decade he genuinely didn't want to lose. The following morning brought a visitor neither of them expected. A young boy no older than 12 rode up the drive on a mule far too big for him, clutching an envelope with white knuckles. Mr. Caldwell, the boy asked, breathless. Man in town paid me $2 to bring you this. Said it was urgent. Nathan took the envelope, and the moment he broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside, his expression darkened considerably. What does it say? Evelyn asked. Nathan read it aloud, his voice flat and controlled despite the fury building underneath. Mr. Caldwell, it has come to my attention that you traveled to Helena seeking information regarding certain agency transactions. I trust you found what you were looking for. I would remind you that evidence means very little without the ability to present it. I have taken the liberty of ensuring Mr. Pruitt understands the risks of testifying against powerful men in this territory. You have until the 15th to accept my offer for the eastern parcel. After that, I cannot guarantee the continued safety of your property, your reputation, or the people you have chosen to associate with. Regards, C. Whitmore. Evelyn's face went white. He threatened Pruitt. And me, Nathan said grimly. And you, if I'm reading between the lines correctly. We have to warn Pruitt. There isn't time, Nathan said, already moving toward the barn. If Whitmore sent this letter days ago, and we've only just received it, whatever he intended for Pruitt may have already happened. They rode for Helena again that same afternoon, the urgency far greater than their first journey, both of them silently praying they wouldn't arrive too late to save the one man brave enough to tell the truth. They pushed the horses harder than either had ever pushed an animal before, trading off short rests only when the horses themselves threatened to give out beneath them. Evelyn's hands had long since gone raw against the reins, but she didn't slow, not once, not even when Nathan called out that they should stop to breathe. We stop when we know Pruitt's alive, she said, and Nathan didn't argue. They reached Helena late on the second day, the town quieter than either remembered it, and when they arrived at the small brick office that housed the marriage agency, The front door hung open on a broken hinge, swinging faintly in the wind. "Pruitt," Nathan called, stepping inside first. The office had been torn apart. Drawers hung open, papers scattered across the floor. The heavy ledger book they'd examined days earlier, missing entirely from its shelf. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "He's not here," she said. "Neither is the evidence." They searched the small back room where Pruitt had retrieved the ledger, and it was there they found him slumped against the wall, a dark bruise swelling along his jaw, his hands bound loosely with rope that looked as though he'd been fighting against it. He stirred at the sound of their footsteps, flinching hard before recognition softened his expression. "Mr. Caldwell," he rasped. "Miss Harper." "Pruitt, thank God." Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, working at the ropes with trembling fingers. "What happened? Who did this?" "Two men," Pruitt said weakly. "Came in after closing. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. Tore the office apart looking for the ledger, and when I wouldn't tell them where I'd hidden the copy I made for you, one of them decided to persuade me." "You made a copy?" Nathan asked sharply. "I've been doing this job a long time, Mr. Caldwell. I know when a man's the kind who comes back for what he thinks he's owed." Pruitt managed a pained smile. "I hid a second copy of that ledger page under the floorboard beneath my desk before you'd even left town. Figured a man like Whitmore wouldn't stop at asking politely." Relief flooded through Evelyn so quickly it nearly buckled her knees. "You're a braver man than you give yourself credit for, Mr. Pruitt." "Brave and terrified aren't mutually exclusive, Miss Harper." Pruitt let Nathan help him to his feet, wincing as he tested his weight. "They took the original ledger and made it very clear what would happen if I said another word to anyone about Charles Whitmore. But they didn't find the copy, and they didn't find my written statement because I mailed that to the Territorial Marshal's office in Virginia City the same day you left." Nathan stared at him. "You sent it ahead." "I told you I have a family to protect," Pruitt said. "I wasn't about to trust a single piece of evidence to survive in one place. If something happened to me, I wanted to make certain the truth didn't die with it." For the first time in days, something like hope moved through Nathan's chest, sharp and unfamiliar, after so much fear. "Then Whitmore doesn't know the marshal's office already has a copy." "No," Pruitt said. "And if we're smart about how we move next, he won't find out until it's far too late for him to stop it." They retrieved the hidden ledger page from beneath the floorboard, and within the hour, Pruitt had agreed to travel with them under Nathan's protection to give a formal statement in person to the Territorial Marshal, a journey that would add several more days to their absence from the ranch, but one none of them believed they could avoid. "Are you certain about this?" Nathan asked him as they prepared to leave. "Whitmore's men already found you once. If they realize you're traveling with us, I'm more certain of this than I've been of anything in a long while." Pruitt said, his voice steadier now than it had been since they'd found him. "A man like Whitmore only wins if the people he frightens stay frightened. I'm done being frightened, Mr. Caldwell." The ride toward Virginia City took 3 more grueling days, and it was on the second night, camped in a shallow ravine meant to keep their fire hidden from the open trail, that the first real crack in their fragile plan appeared. "Someone's out there," Evelyn whispered, jerking upright from where she'd been resting near the fire. Nathan was on his feet instantly, hand on his rifle. "We're around, past the ridge." I saw movement. Pruitt scrambled back against the boulder, his face draining of color. "They found us." "Stay low, both of you," Nathan ordered, moving toward the tree line with slow, deliberate steps. The night was thick with silence, the kind that made every snapped twig sound like thunder, and Nathan's pulse hammered as he scanned the darkness for any sign of the men Whitmore had almost certainly sent to finish what they'd started in Helena. A shape moved between the trees, and Nathan raised his rifle instinctively. "Don't shoot," a voice called out, young and frightened. "Please, mister, I ain't armed." Nathan hesitated, lowering the rifle slightly as a boy barely older than 15 stepped hesitantly into the firelight, hands raised trembling with cold and fear. "Who are you?" Nathan demanded. "What are you doing out here?" "Name's Tommy, sir. I work stable duty at the Bozeman Way Station." The boy's eyes darted nervously toward Pruitt. "I recognized him from town. I've been following your trail since yesterday morning, trying to work up the nerve to catch up to you." "Why?" Evelyn asked, stepping closer despite Nathan's warning glance. "Because I heard 2 men talking at the station 2 days back," Tommy said, his voice shaking. "Didn't think nothing of it, and at first men come through it talking at business all the time. But then they mentioned Mr. Caldwell's name and a lawyer and something about making sure a certain marshal's office never received whatever was coming its way. Nathan's blood went cold. They're intercepting the mail route. I think so, sir. They said something about a rider ahead of you three, someone paid to make sure a particular letter never made it to Virginia City. Pruitt's face had gone the color of ash. My statement. If they intercept it before we arrive, then it's our word against Whitmore's with no paper evidence to back it. Nathan finished grimly. How far ahead is this rider, Tommy? Half a day, maybe less if he's kept a hard pace. Nathan turned to Evelyn, urgency sharpening every line of his face. We have to catch him before he reaches Virginia City. Then we ride through the night, Evelyn said without hesitation. Miss Harper, you've barely slept in 3 days. Neither have you, and I'm not staying behind while the only proof that clears both our names disappears into Charles Whitmore's pocket. Evelyn was already moving toward the horses. We ride together, Nathan, or not at all. There was no time to argue, and some part of Nathan didn't want to. He nodded once, sharp and decisive, and within minutes, the four of them, Nathan, Evelyn Pruitt, and a frightened but determined Tommy, leading the way on his own tired mule, were pushing hard through the darkness toward Virginia City, chasing a rider who carried the fate of everything they'd fought for, tucked inside his saddlebag. They caught him just before dawn, a lone figure resting his horse at a shallow creek, crossing entirely unaware he was being pursued until Nathan's voice cut through the gray morning light. That's far enough. The rider spun hand-dropping toward his hip, but Nathan already had his rifle raised steady and unwavering. I wouldn't, Nathan said quietly. Whatever Whitmore's paying you, it isn't enough to die for out here. The man's eyes flicked between Nathan's rifle and the three others fanned out around him, calculating his odds and clearly not liking the math. I don't want trouble, he finally said, raising his hand slowly. Then hand over whatever you're carrying that belongs to the territorial marshal's office, Nathan said. And you can ride away from this exactly the way you rode into it, alive. The man hesitated only a moment before reaching into his saddlebag and producing a familiar sealed envelope, Pruitt's original mailed statement still intact. Whitmore paid me $200 to make sure this never arrived, the man admitted, tossing it toward them. Didn't say nothing about killing anybody over it. That's more than my pay grade's worth. Smart man, Nathan said. Now ride and don't let us see your face again. The rider didn't need to be told twice. Within moments he was gone, disappearing back down the trail they'd come from, and Evelyn let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for the better part of an hour. We got it, she said, disbelief coloring her relief. We actually got it back. For now, Nathan said, tucking the envelope securely inside his coat. But this proves something more important than the statement itself. What's that? Whitmore's scared enough to intercept federal mail, Nathan said grimly. A man that desperate isn't thinking clearly anymore. And desperate men make mistakes. They reached Virginia City by midday, exhausted but intact, and delivered both the ledger copy and Pruitt's statement directly into the hands of Territorial Marshal Amos Reed, a broad-weathered man whose expression grew increasingly grave as he read through the evidence laid before him. This is serious business, Reed finally said, setting the papers down. Falsifying a marriage agency request, intimidating a witness, intercepting federal mail. Whitmore's looking at charges that could end his business permanently, assuming this evidence holds up in front of a judge. Will it? Nathan asked. With Mr. Pruitt's willingness to testify in person, combined with the bank records your sheriff already secured, I'd say Whitmore's got a great deal more to worry about than a stubborn rancher who won't sell his land. Reed looked between the three of them, something like respect settling into his weathered features. You folks didn't have to go through all this trouble. Most people would have taken the money and walked away rather than risk everything chasing down proof. Whitmore didn't just want my land, Nathan said quietly. He wanted to prove that a man like him could take whatever he wanted from people who couldn't fight back. I wasn't willing to let him be right. Reed nodded slowly. I'll have a warrant drawn up for his arrest by morning. In the meantime, I'd suggest all of you stay somewhere safe tonight. Once word gets out that Whitmore's scheme is unraveling, there's no telling how a cornered man like that might react. That night, in a small rented room above the Virginia City boarding house, Evelyn sat by the window watching the last light fade from the sky, the weight of the past several days finally beginning to settle over her exhausted body. Nathan found her there quiet and still and hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside. You should rest, he said gently. Tomorrow's going to bring it its own difficulties. I keep thinking about how close it came to falling apart, Evelyn said without turning around. If that boy hadn't found us, if we'd been an hour later reaching that creek, everything we fought for would have disappeared and Whitmore would have walked away untouched. But it didn't fall apart, Nathan said, moving to stand beside her, because you refused to let it. Every step of this, Evelyn, you could have turned back, gone somewhere safer. Let me handle it alone. You didn't. Evelyn finally turned to face him, something raw and honest breaking through the careful composure she'd maintained for days. I didn't turn back because somewhere between that first night at your door and this moment, this stopped being about proving my own innocence. It became about not letting a man like Whitmore win against someone who never deserved this fight in the first place. Someone like me, someone like you, she confirmed quietly. Nathan, I've known you 8 days. 8 days, and I trust you more than I trusted people I knew for years back home. That terrifies me more than anything Whitmore's done. Nathan studied her for a long, charged moment, the distance between them shrinking without either of them consciously choosing to close it. It terrifies me too, he admitted quietly. I spent 15 years convincing myself I didn't need anyone. And then you knocked on the wrong door, and every single thing I told myself started falling apart. Is that a bad thing? I don't know yet, Nathan said honestly. But I know I don't want you to leave when this is over, Evelyn. Whatever this is between us, I'm not ready to pretend it isn't there anymore. The silence between them stretched fragile and charged, and for a moment it seemed as though something might finally shift something neither of them had allowed themselves to name until this exhausted, terrified moment. But before either could move closer, a sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile stillness. Mr. Caldwell, it was Tommy's voice, breathless and urgent. Marshall Reed needs you downstairs right away. Something's happened. Nathan and Evelyn exchanged a look heavy with unfinished words, and Nathan reluctantly pulled the door open to find Tommy standing in the hallway, pale and shaking. What is it? Nathan asked. Word just came in by wire, Tommy said. Whitmore. He found out about the warrant somehow before Marshall Reed could even serve it. Nobody knows how, but he's already fled his office in town. Marshall thinks he's headed back toward your ranch, Mr. Caldwell. Some folks are saying he means to make sure there's nothing left worth fighting over if he can't have it legally. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath them both. Every step they'd taken, every risk, every mile ridden through darkness and danger had bought them evidence in a warrant, but it had also given Charles Whitmore something far more dangerous, nothing left to lose. How long ago did he leave? Nathan demanded. Hours, sir. Maybe half a day's head start already. Evelyn was already moving toward her boots' exhaustion, forgotten beneath the surge of adrenaline and fear. Then we're already behind him. Nathan looked at her, at Pruitt standing pale in the doorway behind Tommy, at the fragile life they had all fought so hard to protect, now hanging by a thread stretched thinner than it had ever been. Get the horses, he said grimly. We ride within the hour. Marshall Reed met them in the stable yard minutes later, already strapping on his gun belt, his expression hard with the particular urgency of a lawman who understood exactly how quickly a desperate, cornered man could turn violent. I'm sending 2 deputies ahead of us, Reed said. But it's a full day's ride, maybe more if the weather turns. Whitmore knows this territory. If he's decided the ranch is worth more to him destroyed than lost to a courtroom, we may not reach it in time to stop him. Then we ride faster than a full day, Nathan said, swinging up onto his horse. That's my home. That's Boone standing guard over it right now with no idea what's riding toward him. I'm not going to lose it or him because we were too slow chasing evidence in another town. Evelyn met his eyes across the yard, exhaustion and fear, and something fierce and unshakable passing between them in a single glance. Then let's ride, she said. And together with Marshall Reed's deputies close behind, they turned their horses toward home, toward whatever waited for them on the eastern boundary of a ranch that had once represented nothing but silence, and now represented everything Nathan Caldwell had left to lose. Orchestrated climactic dialogue sequence, maintaining narrative continuity, seamlessly. Orchestrated climactic dialogue sequence maintaining narrative continuity, seamlessly. They rode through the night without stopping, trading brief rests for the horses only when exhaustion threatened to break the animals down completely. Evelyn's whole body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible, but every time she thought about slowing down, she pictured Boone standing alone at the ranch with no warning of what was coming, and she pushed harder instead. How much farther? she called out to Nathan as gray dawn began creeping over the hills. 2 hours, maybe less, if we cut through the North Pass instead of the main road. Nathan's voice was tight with barely restrained fear. It's rougher terrain, but it'll save us time Whitmore doesn't know we have. Then take it. Marshal Reed pulled his horse alongside them, his expression grim. Caldwell, I need you to understand something. If Whitmore's as desperate as that wire suggested, he may not be thinking about escape anymore. A man who knows he's already lost everything sometimes stops caring what happens next. I understand exactly what that means, Marshal. Nathan said, his jaw tight. It means we don't have time to talk about it. We have time to ride. They cut through the North Pass as the sun climbed higher, the horses lathered and straining beneath them. And when they finally crested the last ridge above the ranch, the sight that greeted them made Evelyn's heart seize in her chest. Smoke, thick and black, rose from somewhere near the barn, far worse than the smoldering corner fire from days before. Figures moved near the house, and even from this distance, the unmistakable crack of gunfire echoed across the valley. Boone, Nathan breathed, already kicking his horse into a dead run. They came down off the ridge at a reckless pace, and as the ranch came fully into view, Evelyn saw Boone Whitfield pressed behind an overturned water trough. Rifle raised, exchanging fire with 2 men positioned near the barn, while a third figure, unmistakably Charles Whitmore, stood near the house itself, a torch in his hand, his expensive coat streaked with soot and fury. Whitmore, Nathan shouted, drawing his rifle as he closed the distance. Put it down. Whitmore turned, and for the first time since Nathan had met him, all pretense of civility had vanished completely. What remained was something far more dangerous, a man who understood he had already lost everything that mattered to him and had nothing left to protect except his own wounded pride. You think a warrant changes anything? Whitmore shouted back, his voice cracking with barely controlled rage. I built an empire in this territory, Caldwell, and you and that woman tore it apart over a piece of dirt you don't even properly farm. Put the torch down, Charles. Marshal Reed called out, his own weapon raised as the deputies fanned out behind him. This ends now, one way or another. It already ended. Whitmore said, something broken and unhinged in his voice. The moment that fool clerk decided to grow a conscience, it ended. So if I can't have this land, Caldwell, then neither can you. He moved to throw the torch toward the house, and everything happened in the span of a single breathless heartbeat. Nathan fired a warning shot into the ground beside Whitmore's feet, hoping to startle him into dropping the flame, but instead Whitmore stumbled backward in shock, losing his footing on the uneven ground, and the torch flew from his hand in an arc that sent it crashing not toward the house, but directly into a stack of dry hay bales piled near the barn's open doorway. The fire caught instantly, roaring upward with terrifying speed, and one of Whitmore's hired men, apparently deciding his employer's cause was no longer worth dying for, dropped his weapon and bolted toward the tree line without a backward glance. The barn, Boone shouted. There's still stock inside. Nathan didn't hesitate. He swung down from his horse before it had fully stopped and sprinted toward the burning structure, ignoring Evelyn's terrified scream behind him. Nathan, no! But he was already gone, disappearing through the smoke pouring from the barn's entrance, and Evelyn felt her heart lodge somewhere in her throat as she watched the flames climb higher, consuming the wooden structure with terrible speed. Marshal Reed and his deputies moved quickly to subdue the remaining gunmen, while Whitmore, disoriented and finally understanding the full weight of what he'd set into motion, made no move to run, simply standing frozen amid the chaos he'd created, watching his last desperate gambit collapse into ash and smoke around him. Someone help him! Evelyn shouted, already moving toward the barn, despite Boone's attempt to grab her arm. You can't go in there, Miss Harper. It's not safe. Neither is standing here while he dies alone. She broke free and ran toward the barn's entrance, just as Nathan reemerged through the smoke, coughing violently, leading 2 terrified horses by their halters, his shirt scorched along one sleeve, his face streaked black with soot. Nathan. Evelyn reached him just as his knees buckled, catching him before he could collapse fully to the ground. You absolute fool, you could have died in there. Couldn't just let them burn, Nathan managed between coughs, though his voice was hoarse and strained from the smoke. 15 years, Evelyn. 15 years I've kept this place standing on nothing but stubbornness. Wasn't about to watch it burn because of a man who never understood what it cost to build something worth protecting. Evelyn helped him further from the burning structure, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot, dusting her own face. Relief and terror tangled so tightly together she couldn't separate one from the other. "Don't you ever do that again," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare do that to me again." "Wasn't planning on making a habit of it," Nathan rasped, and despite everything, despite the smoke and the chaos and the destruction surrounding them, something like a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. Behind them, Marshall Reed had Whitmore and Irons, the once powerful land developer, now silent and hollow-eyed, watching the barn burn with the empty expression of a man who finally understood exactly how much he'd destroyed to gain absolutely nothing. "Charles Whitmore," Reed said formally, his voice carrying clearly across the smoke-filled yard. "You're under arrest for fraud, witness, intimidation, obstruction of federal mail, and attempted destruction of property. Anything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you." Whitmore said nothing, his eyes fixed on the collapsing barn, and for the first time Nathan saw something almost pitiable in the man who had spent months trying to destroy everything Nathan had built. A man so consumed by ambition that he'd been willing to burn down another person's entire life rather than accept a single loss. "Get him out of here," Nathan said quietly, and Reed nodded, leading Whitmore toward a waiting horse without another word. The fire took another hour to fully die down, and by the time the last embers had been smothered, exhaustion had settled over everyone like a physical weight. Boone's arm had been grazed by a bullet during the exchange, though he waved off concern with the stubborn dismissiveness of a man who'd survived worse. Pruitt sat quietly on an overturned crate near the house, still shaken but alive, and Tommy hovered nearby, wide-eyed, at having witnessed more excitement in one morning than most men saw in a lifetime. Evelyn found Nathan standing alone near the barn's smoldering remains as the last light of afternoon began stretching long shadows across the scorched earth. "You lost part of it," she said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "The barn." "I lost part of it," Nathan agreed, "but I didn't lose the ranch. I didn't lose the herd, not entirely. And I didn't lose—" He stopped himself, his jaw working, as though searching for words he wasn't entirely ready to say aloud. "You didn't lose what?" Evelyn asked softly. Nathan turned to face her, fully soot still smudged across his cheek, his eyes tired but clearer than she'd seen them since the night she'd first knocked on his door. "I didn't lose you," he said quietly. "Whitmore tried to use you against me from the very beginning, Evelyn. He tried to turn your arrival into a weapon, and instead you became the reason I still have anything left standing here at all." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat and pain. "Nathan, I need to say this now before I lose my nerve." Nathan continued, his voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on every word. 8 days ago, I told myself loneliness was simply the shape my life had taken, and I'd made peace with it. But you knocked on the wrong door, Evelyn, and every single thing I believed about myself and what I needed started falling apart. I don't want you to leave when all of this is finally settled. I don't want to go back to the silence I convinced myself was enough. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, cutting fresh tracks through the soot and dust of the long, brutal day behind them. "I never had anywhere I truly wanted to go back to," she admitted. "Not until I found myself standing in your kitchen, soaking wet, ready to fight you over a lie neither of us told. Somewhere between that night and this moment, Nathan, this stopped feeling like a mistake I needed to escape. It started feeling like the first true thing that ever happened to me." Nathan reached for her hand, tentative at first, and when she didn't pull away, his fingers closed gently around hers. "Then stay," he said quietly. "Not because a false letter brought you here. Not because Whitmore tried to use you as a weapon. Stay because I'm asking you to honestly as myself for the first time in 15 years. "Yes." Evelyn said the word, coming out on a breath of relief and joy so overwhelming it nearly buckled her knees. "Nathan Caldwell, yes, I'll stay." Behind them, Boone cleared his throat loudly, a poorly disguised grin spreading across his weathered face. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said clearly. "Not sorry in the slightest, but Marshall Reed wanted me to let you know he'll need both your statements before he heads back to Virginia City with Whitmore. Figured now might be as good a time as any, unless you two would rather I come back in an hour." Nathan laughed, the sound rough from smoke, but genuine in a way Evelyn hadn't heard from him before, something unburdened finally breaking free. "We'll come now, Boone." "Didn't think you would," Boone said, still grinning as he walked away, "but figured I'd offer anyway." That evening, after statements had been given, after Marshall Reed had ridden off with Whitmore secured and silent, after Pruitt had gratefully accepted Nathan's offer to stay the night, Before continuing his journey home with an armed escort for safety, Nathan and Evelyn finally sat together on the porch steps watching the stars emerge over a ranch that had nearly been lost and was somehow against every odds still standing. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked quietly. "With the barn gone, with everything Whitmore destroyed, trying to break us." "We rebuild," Nathan said simply. "The barn, the fence, all of it. It'll take time and it'll take work, but I've never been afraid of either of those things." In Whitmore, "Reed seems confident the evidence is more than enough to end him," Nathan said. "Fraud, witness intimidation, attempted arson, obstruction of the mail. Even a man with his money isn't likely to talk his way out of all of that." Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up with the adrenaline that had carried her through the longest days of her life. "I keep thinking about that first night," she murmured. "How angry I was standing at your door, certain you'd lied to me. If I'd turned around and left instead of staying to hear you out. But you didn't." Nathan set his arms settling around her shoulders, solid and certain in a way that finally felt like home instead of obligation. "You stayed. Through all of it, every single terrifying moment of it, you stayed." "So did you," Evelyn said softly. "Even when every instinct you'd spent 15 years building told you to protect yourself and push me away, you chose to trust a stranger who showed up soaked and furious at your door. Best mistake anyone ever accidentally made," Nathan said quietly, and Evelyn felt something in her chest unfurl, entirely warm and certain, the last fragile pieces of guardedness finally giving way to something that felt for the first time in longer than she could remember, like genuine hope. They sat together in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them, the scorched remains of the barn, a stark reminder of everything they'd survived, and yet somehow impossibly the ranch felt less like a battlefield now and more like the beginning of something neither of them had believed they'd ever find again. 3 weeks later, word arrived from Virginia City that Charles Whitmore had been formally charged and would stand trial for his crimes. His once thriving land company already collapsing under the weight of investigations into his other dealings throughout the territory. Several other ranchers, it turned out, had faced similar tactics, though none had possessed the courage or the resources to fight back the way Nathan and Evelyn had. "You should see the letters," Boone said one afternoon, riding out to deliver the latest news along with a satisfied grin. "Half the ranchers in the valley are calling you a hero, Nathan. Words spreading fast about how you and Miss Harper brought down Whitmore's whole operation." "I don't need to be anyone's hero," Nathan said, though something like quiet pride flickered behind his tired eyes. "I just needed my land back, and the truth told plainly enough that nobody could twist it anymore." "Well, hero or not, you've got half the valley wanting to help you rebuild that barn," Boone said. "Figured a community's got a way of showing up when it matters most, especially for a man who finally let people close enough to see it." Nathan glanced toward the house where Evelyn stood in the doorway, sunlight catching the loose strands of hair around her face, watching the exchange with a soft, contented expression that still occasionally caught him off guard with how natural it felt. "Yeah," Nathan said quietly, more to himself than to Boone. "I suppose it does." The barn raising took place the following week, neighbors arriving from every corner of the valley with lumber tools and the particular kind of goodwill that only comes from a community that has watched one of its own survive something it shouldn't have. Evelyn worked alongside the other women preparing food for the workers, and more than once throughout the day, Nathan found his eyes drifting toward her across the busy yard, marveling at how completely his life had transformed in the span of a single month. By evening, the new barn stood tall and solid against the darkening sky, a physical testament to everything they had fought to protect. And as the last of their neighbors began departing with tired smiles and promises to return for the harvest, Nathan found himself standing once more beside Evelyn, near the freshly built structure, watching the sun sink below the mountains they had both come to call home. "It's strange," Evelyn said softly. "A month ago I arrived here believing I'd made the worst mistake of my life. Now I can't imagine having ended up anywhere else." "Funny how that works," Nathan said, reaching for her hand. "Sometimes the worst mistakes turn out to be the truest beginnings." Evelyn looked up at him, something soft and certain passing between them, the kind of understanding that no longer needed elaborate words to carry its full weight. "Nathan Caldwell," she said quietly, "I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "So am I, Pa," Nathan said, and for the first time in 15 years, he found he believed it completely. Autumn had barely settled over the valley when a rider from Virginia City brought news that shattered the fragile peace Nathan and Evelyn had only just begun to trust. Whitmore's lawyer filed for a delay, Boone said, dismounting hard in front of the newly rebuilt barn, his face grim in a way that made Evelyn's stomach twist immediately. Claims new evidence has surfaced that could clear him of the arson charges. Nathan set down the fence post he had been carrying. What new evidence? That's the trouble, Boone said. Nobody's saying yet, but Marshal Reed sent word that Whitmore's attorney is arguing someone else set that fire. Someone with a grudge against you specifically separate from the land dispute entirely. Evelyn felt cold dread settle into her chest. That's absurd. We watched him do it. Doesn't matter what we watched, Nathan said grimly. If his lawyer can plant enough doubt in front of a jury, Whitmore walks away from the most serious charge against him. Fraud and witness intimidation might still stick, but arson carries the heaviest sentence. He knows that better than anyone. So what happens now? Now, Boone said, the marshal wants all three of us, you, Nathan, and Pruitt, back in Virginia City by the end of the week. Trial's been moved up instead of delayed on account of the judge not wanting this dragging through winter. Reed figures if we get ahead of whatever story Whitmore's cooking up, we keep the truth from getting buried under it. Nathan looked toward Evelyn, and she could see the calculation behind his eyes, the same steady resolve that had carried them through Helena, through the burning barn, through everything Whitmore had thrown at them since the night she'd first knocked on his door. Then we go, he said. We've come too far to let a lawyer's trick undo it now. They arrived in Virginia City 3 days later to a town buzzing with anticipation. The trial having drawn attention from ranchers and townsfolk throughout the territory who had followed Whitmore's fall with the particular hunger people reserve for watching powerful men finally answer for their sins. Marshal Reed met them at the courthouse steps, his expression tighter than Nathan had ever seen it. There's something you need to know before we go inside, Reed said quietly, pulling them aside from the gathering crowd. Whitmore's lawyer found a witness, a man claiming he saw someone else near your barn the morning of the fire, someone who supposedly had reason to want revenge against you, separate from the land dispute. That's a lie, Nathan said flatly. Maybe, Reed said. But the witness is willing to testify under oath, and unless we can discredit him, a jury might believe it enough to create reasonable doubt. Who is this witness? Evelyn asked. Reed hesitated, something uneasy flickering across his weathered face. Man named Silas Bennett. Says he used to work your land years back before you inherited it from your father. Claims you fired him unfairly, and he's harbored a grudge ever since. Nathan went very still, memory surfacing slowly, unwillingly. Silas Bennett, he repeated. I remember him. I let him go 8 years ago for stealing cattle and selling them off my own herd. He wasn't fired unfairly. He was fired because he was a thief. Can you prove that? There should be records, Nathan said, his mind racing. The sheriff at the time, old Sheriff Coker, handled it. He caught Bennett red-handed with 2 of my steers branded over. If Coker's still alive, he can testify to exactly what happened. Coker retired to his daughter's place outside Bozeman a few years back, Boone offered. I can send a rider today, but Bozeman's the better part of 2 days each way. Trial starts tomorrow morning. Then we ask for a delay, Nathan said. Requesting a delay makes you look like you're stalling, Reed warned. Whitmore's lawyer will use it against you. Tell the jury you needed time to construct an alibi. Evelyn's mind worked quickly, the same sharp instinct that had cracked open Whitmore's scheme from the very beginning, refusing to accept defeat now. What if we don't need Coker at all? She said suddenly. What do you mean? Nathan asked. You said Bennett was caught with stolen cattle branded over. If there are still records of the brand alteration physical evidence, not just testimony, that would be enough to discredit him without needing Coker to appear in person at all. Nathan's eyes lit with sudden understanding. The county recorder's office keeps a registry of reported cattle theft and brand disputes. If Bennett's case was ever formally logged, then it's a matter of public record sitting in this very town, Evelyn finished. We don't need to send anyone to Bozeman. We need to walk 3 streets over. They reached the county recorder's office just before closing, and after a tense hour of searching through dusty ledgers with the clerk's reluctant assistance, Nathan finally found an entry from 8 years prior, documenting a formal complaint filed against Silas Bennett for cattle theft and brand alteration, complete with a notarized description of the altered marks and Sheriff Coker's original signature. This is it, Nathan breathed, staring at the page like it was the answer to a prayer he hadn't dared voice aloud. This proves everything. It proves he's a liar with a motive to lie again, Evelyn said, relief flooding through her voice. That's more than enough to unravel whatever story Whitmore's lawyer built around him. They delivered the document to Marshal Reed that same evening, and for the first time since arriving in Virginia City, something like genuine confidence settled over the small group gathered in the marshal's office. This changes things considerably, Reed said, reviewing the ledger entry carefully. A documented theft with physical evidence is a great deal harder to argue away than a grudge dressed up as testimony. I'd wager Whitmore's lawyer won't even attempt to put Bennett on the stand once he realizes we have this. And if he does anyway, Nathan asked, then he watches his own witness destroyed in front of the entire jury. Reed said, something almost like satisfaction in his voice. Either way, Caldwell, I'd say your position just got considerably stronger. The trial began the following morning. The courthouse packed with spectators eager to witness the downfall of a man who had once seemed untouchable throughout the territory. Nathan sat beside Evelyn in the gallery watching as the prosecution laid out the evidence. Methodically, Pruitt's testimony regarding the falsified marriage request, the bank records tracing the shell company back to Whitmore Boone's account of the attack on the ranch, and finally, devastatingly, the county ledger documenting Silas Bennett's history of theft, which Whitmore's own lawyer chose not to call as a witness, after all, exactly as Reed had predicted. By the third day, the weight of evidence had become undeniable, and Nathan watched Charles Whitmore's composure crumble piece by piece as witness after witness dismantled the carefully constructed lies he'd spent months building. When the jury finally returned after a deliberation that lasted barely 2 hours, the verdict came as no surprise to anyone in the courtroom, except perhaps Whitmore himself, who seemed genuinely stunned to hear the word guilty spoken aloud on every count against him. 20 years, the judge announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. For fraud, witness intimidation, obstruction of federal correspondence, and arson with intent to destroy property. Whitmore's face went slack with disbelief as the bailiffs moved to escort him from the courtroom, and as he passed Nathan and Evelyn seated in the gallery, something desperate and hollow flickered in his eyes. This isn't over, he muttered, though the words carried none of the menace they once might have held. You'll see. Men like me always find a way back. Maybe, Nathan said quietly, meeting his gaze without flinching. But you won't find your way back to my land, Charles. Not now, not ever. Whitmore had nothing left to say to that, and the bailiffs led him away in silence. The once powerful land developer reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale the valley would tell for years to come. Outside the courthouse, relief broke over the small group like a physical wave. Pruitt shook Nathan's hand with genuine warmth, his earlier nervousness entirely replaced by quiet pride. I'm glad I stopped being afraid, he said simply. Some things are worth the risk. You saved us, Pruitt, Evelyn said, embracing him briefly. Whatever happens next, you should know that. I think you two saved yourselves, Pruitt said, smiling for the first time since they'd met him. I just happened to be standing close enough to help. Marshal Reed approached as Pruitt departed to catch his stage home, his expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a lawman who had watched justice actually prevail against considerable odds. Whitmore's business holdings are being seized and liquidated as part of the sentencing, he told them. Several of the ranchers he'd been pressuring will finally have some relief from his tactics. You two did more good here than you probably realize. We just wanted our lives back, Nathan said. Sometimes that's exactly what good looks like, Reed replied, shaking both their hands firmly before turning back toward the courthouse to attend to the remaining paperwork. They rode home slower than they'd traveled in weeks, no longer racing against threats or deadlines, simply allowing themselves for the first time since Evelyn had arrived at Nathan's door to exist without the shadow of Whitmore's schemes hanging over every mile. It's really over, Evelyn said on their second night camped beneath open sky, disbelief still coloring her voice. I keep waiting for something else to go wrong. Old habit, Nathan said, gently settling beside her near the fire. Whitmore had us both looking over our shoulders so long, it's strange to imagine we don't have to anymore. What do we do now that there's no scheme to unravel, no threat to fight? Nathan considered this question seriously, watching the flames dance between them. Now we build something, he said finally. One out of survival, out of choice. I want to expand the herd next spring. Repair the sections of fence we never got around to after everything with Whitmore. And I want... He hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his features, despite everything they'd already survived together. What do you want, Nathan? "I want to marry you," he said, simply the words landing with quiet certainty rather than dramatic declaration. "Not because a false letter brought you to my door, and not because we survived something terrible together. I want to marry you because somewhere in the middle of all of it, I fell in love with a woman brave enough to stay when every reasonable instinct told her to run." Evelyn's breath caught, tears rising unbidden despite the steadiness in her voice when she finally answered. "I've been waiting for you to ask since the barn raising," she admitted, laughing softly through the emotion thickening her throat. "I was beginning to think Charles Whitmore's trial would end before you found the courage." "In my defense," Nathan said, a rare smile breaking across his face, "I was slightly occupied preventing a man from burning down my entire life." "A fair excuse," Evelyn conceded, leaning into him. "Yes, Nathan Caldwell, I'll marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch attended by nearly the entire valley neighbors who had once known Nathan only as the quiet, distant rancher who kept to himself, now filling his home with laughter and warmth that had been absent for 15 long years. Boone stood as Nathan's witness, grinning the entire ceremony with the particular satisfaction of a man who had watched his oldest friend finally find his way back to happiness. Even Tommy made the journey from Bozeman, proudly recounting to anyone who would listen how he'd helped chase down evidence that brought a powerful man to justice. As winter settled over the valley months later, the ranch that had once echoed with nothing but silence now held the steady rhythm of a life fully lived. 2 cups sat on the table each morning instead of one. 2 sets of footprints crossed the snow between the house and the rebuilt barn. The rooms that had carried years of quiet grief now carried conversation, laughter, and the particular warmth of a home built not around loss, but around the courage to love again, despite it. Nathan often found himself thinking back to that first stormy night, the stranger standing furious and soaked in his doorway, the letter neither of them had written, that had somehow impossibly delivered him exactly what he'd spent 15 years convinced he would never have again. He understood now that honoring Sarah's memory had never required him to refuse happiness for the rest of his life. It had simply required him to recognize it when it finally unexpectedly arrived. Evelyn, for her part, no longer thought of herself as the woman rejected by a stepmother who never wanted her, or the desperate traveler who had risked everything on a stranger's false promise. She had become, in the truest sense, exactly where she belonged, valued not because someone had arranged it, but because 2 people who had every reason to remain guarded had chosen deliberately and completely to trust each other instead. Charles Whitmore served his sentence in the territorial prison, his name becoming little more than a cautionary tale told by ranchers throughout the valley whenever a stranger came sniffing around land that wasn't theirs to take. His schemes, his cruelty, his desperate final gambit to burn down what he couldn't legally claim, all of it had ultimately accomplished nothing except bringing 2 broken people together in a way no honest arrangement ever could have. And so the ranch that once represented nothing but loneliness became, against every impossible odd, a home filled with everything Nathan Caldwell had once believed was lost to him forever. A wrong address, a stranger's mistaken knock, a lie meant to destroy twisted instead into the truest beginning either of them had ever known. Some doors, it turned out, were never wrong at all. They were simply waiting for the right person to knock.